The bruises were fresh, dark patches blooming against her pale skin, a silent testimony of the violence she endured behind closed doors. MaryJayne Collins had been telling her friends something wasn't right. She had been sending texts, short, desperate messages, saying she was scared, saying she wanted to leave. But she never did. Or maybe she never got the chance. On the night of her murder, she was just 23 years old, a young mother trying to hold her life together for the sake of her children. She had already survived so much. She had loved, lost, and picked up the pieces. But what she didn't know was that the man she had come to trust, the man she believed had her back, had been waiting for the perfect moment to betray her. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He wasn't just an abuser. He had a reason, a vendetta, a slow-burning grudge that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with revenge. By the time help arrived, it was too late. She was gone. Some say she should have seen it coming. Some say she should have left the first time he raised his hand. But hindsight is always clearer when you're standing outside the storm. The truth is, MaryJayne did what so many victims of abuse do. She convinced herself that things would get better, that maybe this time he meant it when he said he was sorry. But in the end, her faith in him cost her everything. The crime scene was haunting, bloodstains on the floor, silence hanging thick in the air. 2 children in the next room, too young to understand what had just happened, but old enough to know that something was terribly wrong. The police report would later reveal the chilling details. How she fought for her life, how her final moments were filled with fear and pain, and how, in the end, she never stood a chance. The man responsible for her murder didn't just wake up that morning and decide to take her life. This had been building for years. The moment she entered his world, her fate was already sealed. She thought she had escaped a nightmare, but she had walked straight into another one. Why would a man kill the woman he claimed to love? And what dark past led to this brutal murder? Before we get into the chilling details of this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. MaryJayne Collins was 23 years old, a young mother raising 2 boys who were her entire world. She wasn't just a name in a headline or a tragic statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a person with dreams. Her life had never been easy, but she carried herself with quiet strength. She had been through hardships before, struggled, fallen, picked herself back up again. Those who knew her say she was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She had a soft heart but a tough exterior, one she had built over time, shaped by the battles she had already fought. Her mother remembers her as a fighter, someone who wanted more for herself and her kids, a woman who had made mistakes but was trying to build a better future. Her friends describe her as loyal, a protector, someone who put others before herself, sometimes to her own detriment. But MaryJayne wasn't just a mother. She was young, full of life, and hopeful about love. She had already loved once before. Before Dawayland Hurst entered her life, there was Michael King, the father of her child. Their relationship was complicated. He wasn't perfect. Far from it. Michael King had a past. He wasn't just another boyfriend. He was someone who walked a dangerous line between fatherhood and the streets. He had ties to gangs, a criminal record. He was the type of man who lived by his own rules, and MaryJayne knew that. Their relationship had its ups and downs. There were moments of love, but there were also moments of chaos. Still, no matter what, they had one thing in common: a child. But then, everything changed. In 2020, Michael King killed a man. Not just any man, Dawayland Hurst's half-brother. The killing of Hurst's half-brother wasn't just another violent act in an already dangerous world. It was personal. It left a scar that wouldn't heal. For Hurst, this wasn't just about losing family. It was about revenge. And then something happened that no one could have predicted. Michael King's ex, the mother of his child, the woman who should have been off limits to anyone with a vendetta against him, started dating Dawayland Hurst. Maybe MaryJayne didn't know the full extent of the history between the 2 men. Maybe she thought she had found something new, something different, something safe. But if she had known what was coming, would she have ever let him in? Looking back, there were warning signs. MaryJayne's past had already been intertwined with violence, but now her present had become a ticking time bomb. She had unknowingly put herself in the crosshairs of a man who had been waiting for an opportunity to settle an old score. Some believe Hurst was never in love with her at all, that from the moment he met her, he had one thing on his mind, and when the time was right, he was going to make her pay. Dawayland Hurst was not just another man with a troubled past. His life had been shaped by violence from an early age. He grew up in a world where power wasn't given, it was taken, where loyalty meant everything and disrespect had consequences. His family had been involved in the streets for years. His half-brother, the one whose murder he would never forgive, was no different. Hurst had learned from an early age that the strong survived and the weak got swallowed whole. His childhood wasn't the kind that left room for innocence. By the time most kids were riding bikes and playing video games, Hurst had already witnessed things no child should see. His family's history was one of arrests, prison visits, and a code of silence. Some say he was born into the cycle, others say he chose it. But one thing was clear: violence wasn't just around him, it was inside him. In 2020, everything changed. Hurst's half-brother was killed by Michael King, a man who walked the same streets, played by the same rules, but had pulled the trigger first. For Hurst, this wasn't just about losing family. This was about unfinished business, a debt that had to be repaid. Revenge for men like Hurst wasn't a question. It was an expectation. But Michael King was out of reach, locked away, serving his time. So Hurst did the unthinkable. He waited for a way to make King suffer, to take from him what he had taken. And then an opportunity fell right into his hands. When Dawayland Hurst met MaryJayne Collins, she had no idea who he really was. Maybe she was looking for love. Maybe she wanted someone who would protect her. Or maybe she just didn't see the danger coming. At first, Hurst wasn't the monster the world would later see him as. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make her feel safe. And for MaryJayne, who had already survived a difficult past, that feeling meant everything. She fell for him. But what she didn't know was that from the moment they met, Hurst was never falling for her. He was setting her up. People who knew MaryJayne would later ask, why? Why would she trust a man with a violent past? Why would she, of all people, get close to someone tied to the same world she was trying to escape? But the answer isn't as simple as it seems. To understand MaryJayne's choices, you have to understand the cycle. When someone has already experienced hardship, already survived toxic relationships, already lived through trauma, sometimes red flags don't look like red flags anymore. They look like normal life. Maybe she thought she could handle him. Maybe she thought he was different. But her friends, they saw what she didn't. They saw the bruises, the sudden changes in her behavior, the way her once lively, outgoing personality had started to fade into something else, something fearful, something trapped, and they begged her to leave. She wanted out, but could she escape? In the days leading up to her murder, MaryJayne told people the truth. She wasn't safe. She wanted out. But there was one problem. Hurst wasn't going to let her go. By then, she wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his revenge. And once she tried to break free, once she saw him for who he really was, her fate was sealed. In the days leading up to her murder, MaryJayne Collins was afraid, and she had every reason to be. She had seen the flashes of anger in Dawayland Hurst's eyes before. She had felt his grip tighten around her wrist one too many times, and she had started to understand something horrifying. The man she thought she loved wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous. But by the time she realized how much danger she was in, it was already too late. MaryJayne wasn't silent about her fear. In the last days of her life, she started reaching out. To her friends, to the people she trusted. The messages were desperate. I need to get away from him. I don't feel safe. If something happens to me, tell my mom I love her. These weren't just casual complaints about a bad relationship. They were warnings, cries for help. And the most chilling part? Some of her friends already knew she was in trouble. They had seen the bruises. They had heard the stories. They had begged her to leave before it was too late. But leaving a man like Dawayland Hurst wasn't simple. Because when a man like him loses control, he doesn't let go. He tightens his grip. And for MaryJayne, that grip was turning deadly. In abusive relationships, violence doesn't always come in one sudden explosion. It builds, it escalates, it waits for the perfect moment. For Dawayland Hurst, that moment was coming. Some say it was jealousy, some say it was revenge, but whatever set him off, it was raging inside him in the days before the murder. Maybe he sensed that MaryJayne was pulling away. Maybe he thought she was going to expose him. Maybe he just couldn't stand the idea of losing control. But the moment he realized she was slipping away, something inside him snapped. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. And they weren't just in her text messages. They were public, on social media, on police records, in the worried voices of her friends. And yet, no one stopped it. There were reports of domestic disturbances, arguments, possible abuse. But was it enough for authorities to step in? Or was it just another case of a woman being told to handle it herself? MaryJayne had posted cryptic messages. She hinted at trouble, at fear. But social media has a way of making real-life danger look like just another dramatic post. And no one knew just how serious it really was. MaryJayne wanted out. She had started making plans. She had told people she was ready to leave him. But Hurst was watching. He could feel her slipping through his fingers. And for a man like him, that wasn't an option. What happened next was inevitable. The night MaryJayne Collins was murdered wasn't supposed to be any different. She was still making plans, still hoping she'd find a way out. But what she didn't know was that Dawayland Hurst had already made his own plans. And for him, there was only one way this story would end. It was a quiet night in Seabrook, Texas, a place where people felt safe, where neighbors waved from across the street, where no one expected to wake up to a murder. But that night, everything changed. Inside her home, MaryJayne's last moments were playing out. Was there an argument, a struggle, or did Hurst walk in, silent and determined, knowing exactly what he was about to do? All we know is that when it was over, she was gone. And the horror was only beginning. The attack was brutal. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was rage. The kind of rage that doesn't stop. The kind of rage that makes a man keep going, long after his victim has stopped fighting. Blunt force trauma, strangulation, a level of overkill that made investigators certain. This was personal. He didn't just want her dead. He wanted her to suffer. And the most haunting part? She wasn't alone. MaryJayne had two young sons, boys who were supposed to grow up with their mother, boys who had already lost so much. Were they there? Did they hear it? Did they see it? The thought is unbearable. And yet, when officers arrived, the reality was even worse. Because when they stepped inside that house, they knew right away this was no ordinary crime scene. The first call to 911 came in just after midnight. A voice, shaky, panicked, struggling to put words together. "There's blood. I think she's..." And then silence. A pause long enough to send chills down anyone's spine. And then, "You have to send someone. Please. Now." The caller knew. They knew before the police got there, before the medics arrived, before anyone had even touched her body. MaryJayne Collins was gone. The first officers on the scene had no idea what they were about to walk into. But the moment they stepped inside, it hit them. The silence, the smell, the way the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves had absorbed the violence. And then they saw her, lying there, motionless, a young mother, a daughter, a friend, gone. And across the room, evidence of something even more chilling, a sign that this wasn't just murder. This was revenge. But revenge for what? That's what police needed to find out. And the answer would lead them straight to Dawayland Hurst. In the hours after MaryJayne Collins' murder, investigators weren't just searching for clues, they were searching for a killer. Somewhere out there, Dawayland Hurst was on the move. Did he have a plan, or was he just running? Either way, time was against him, because the evidence was already catching up. By the time police arrived at the crime scene, they already had a name. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mystery. MaryJayne had told them herself, not in words, but in bruises, in text messages, In silent cries for help that too many people ignored, investigators started piecing it together right away. Hurst was her boyfriend. She had told friends she was scared. She had been trying to leave. And now she was dead. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern police had seen too many times before. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed proof, and it didn't take long to find it. Evidence recovered from the scene. Inside the house, everything told a story. Blood spatter, signs of a struggle, a life taken too soon. But there was something else, something Hurst didn't count on. Evidence that pointed directly to him, footprints leading out the door, a phone still active, still tracking his location, CCTV cameras picking up his last known movements, and then, the most damning piece of all, a weapon found near the crime scene, a match to the wounds on MaryJayne's body. And it was only a matter of time before forensic testing would tie it back to Hurst. He could run, but he couldn't hide from the truth. The moment police realized who they were looking for, the search began. They checked his home, his friends' houses, every spot he'd ever been known to hide out. But he was already gone. Had he planned this escape, or was he just panicking? For hours, nothing, no phone calls, no sightings, nothing. Then, one lead, a vehicle spotted on security footage, leaving town. Could it be him? Detectives raced to track it down, because if they didn't, if he slipped away, there was no telling what he'd do next. In modern investigations, digital evidence is everything. Hurst may have tried to disappear, but he left a trail that police knew how to follow. Cell tower pings, tracking his movements after the murder. Security cameras watching every turn he took. Social media, activity before and after the crime. And then the final piece, his car, still moving, still out there. The net was closing in. And when police finally caught up, it wasn't just about bringing him in. It was about justice for MaryJayne, for her children, and for everyone who knew this should have never happened. Somewhere between the first bruise and the final breath, there were warning signs. So many warning signs. And yet no one stopped it. No one stopped him. Now one question remains. Could MaryJayne Collins have been saved? Or was she always running out of time? When people look back on MaryJayne's story, they ask the same thing. Why didn't she just leave? It's a question that's been asked too many times before, too many times after it's already too late. But the truth is, leaving isn't as simple as it sounds. For many victims of domestic violence, escaping is the most dangerous time of all, because leaving doesn't guarantee safety. It often guarantees more danger. MaryJayne wanted out. She told friends, she tried, but she was trapped. Not by walls, not by locks, but by fear. Fear of what would happen if she left. Fear of what Hurst was capable of. And she had every reason to be afraid. Because statistically, the most lethal time for an abuse victim is when they try to escape. How coercion and control work in abusive situations, domestic violence, doesn't always start with fists. It starts with control. It starts with isolation. It starts with small things that seem harmless until they aren't. For MaryJayne, the signs were there. Hurst dictated who she could see, where she could go, what she could say. He made her feel alone. He made her depend on him. And once he had that power, the violence wasn't far behind. When a woman is killed by a partner, people often say, no one saw it coming. But that's never true. The signs were there. The warnings were there. The question is, was anyone listening? Before her death, did MaryJayne report the abuse? Did police ignore her? Were there opportunities to intervene? And if someone had stepped in, would she still be alive? These are the hard questions that too many families are left asking. Because when a woman dies like this, it's not just one man who failed her, it's an entire system. In the end, what was this crime really about? Was it about revenge? Was it about power? Or was it something even darker? MaryJayne tried to escape. She fought to survive. But in the end, could she have ever really gotten away? MaryJayne Collins isn't just a name in a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a woman who deserved to live. but instead her life was stolen in an act of rage, revenge, and control. Now her story serves as a warning, a reminder that domestic violence doesn't just end on its own, it escalates, and sometimes it turns deadly. But now we turn the question over to you. What do you think? Was this a crime of passion, or was it premeditated murder? Could Mary Jane's past have sealed her fate? Or was there a moment, a single turning point, where someone could have saved her? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, because these conversations matter, and Mary Jane's story deserves to be heard. If you found this case disturbing, tragic, and important, we cover real stories like this every day. True crime that's gritty, raw, and real. So don't forget to like, subscribe,